Welcome once again to the Brazil Shirt Name podcast with the legendino Tim Vickery out in Rio, where it's sunny, sunny, sunny. Or is it?
Well, it is actually for the first time. We've had I don't expect sympathy, frankly, but we've had
I'll give you
an
some tea, but not the sympathy.
unseasonably cold spell with a kind of blanket of, it was like someone threw a duvet, a grey duvet over everything. But the sun has just emerged in the last couple of hours, and I can clearly see Sugarloaf Mountain away to my left. So everything's coming up roses.
You are so lucky. Imagine that. Imagine me saying, "Oh, I look out my window and I can see Sugarloaf Mountain." Imagine that. No, let me look out my window.
You do have a wonderful view of Totteridge or something like that, don't you? I believe.
Why do you keep hitting me below the belt?
No, possibly out the corner of your eye, you might be able to see a mental institution in the Barnet area.
Well, very well. That's very good. It used to be. Now it's very, 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 very expensive, posh and crap flats. I've been in one of them and I thought, you're going to pay $500,000 for this. You're having a laugh. Having said that, talking about Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, Ashley Cole used to live there with his missus, Cheryl Cole. And it was there that he'd done the dirty with some, I'm not going to be rude about the other woman, but basically, Cheryl Cole was away. Ashley Cole met some girl, and anyway, he didn't. I'm not even going to go into the details. It's quite demeaning, actually. But he didn't honor himself in glory. Having said that, the person who was going to join us today, and who knows, you may still join us within the next hour of this podcast or not. Great British footballer, reckons that Ashley Cole was the best of that golden generation of footballers. Did you know?
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Wow. Now that is something, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. Emile Heskey is who we're talking about, and we're talking, as we always do on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, about a certain match, a classic match, or a match that is of interest to talk about between you and I, Tim. And by the way, I'm Dotun, but thanks for not introducing me.
The other, the most important host is the man who needs no introductions.
That's true. That's true. And only
the
has
member of the British Empire himself. That was a low blow. But I can't resist it. I can't resist it.
I know you can't. I know you can't. Every time you mention that,
do you get plenty of jip from that?
Of course I do. Every time you mention that, of course, I didn't want to take it the first time. It was my mother-in-law who said, "Look, are you crazy? You got to take it." And then my missus called from Japan, which was at the time when I got the invite to accept the award. She said, "You better flipping take it." My missus said that, so. But I'm the one who gets the jip for it. But thanks for mentioning that. Every single time you mention it, you bring up, there is some black guy somewhere who has respected me until... It's true. Tim, it's true. It's true. Anyway, you keep doing it. You keep hitting me low and hard. But we look at a classic football match. And today we're looking at arguably the greatest result outside the 1966 World Cup final for the England team, arguably.
It is an extraordinary result, isn't it? And it's even more extraordinary, I think, if you forget, because we're going back less than 20 years, but it's a different world. We're going back just a few days before 11th of September. So it's a different world in that sense. But in purely football terms, when these days, top-level football, it's often so gorgeously bonkers. It's very, very attacking these days, and you get lots of crazy scorelines. But if we're going back to September the 1st, 2001, those kind of mad scorelines were not nearly as common as they are now. So the idea of an England side going to Germany and winning 5-1, if you look at it from the optics of the time, it's almost off the scale of credibility. And these days, you're getting more of these crazy scorelines because the teams are taking risks, and if they can fall off the edge. They're living close to the edge. You push them, and But that's not the way that the sport was even less than 20 years ago. It's a remarkable scoreline. I'm sorry that Emile hasn't so far joined us. Perhaps he's found out that Brazilian TV call him Emily, and he's blanking us for that reason.
They're not the only ones who called him Emily. Some British commentators also called him that along the way when they didn't know that it was a French name. But it does make me wonder how you keep from going under, or how you keep going under the belt, because I had to try that. When I first heard the score, because I missed the match, and I came home and heard the score, I thought it was 5-1 to Germany.
Right.
That is what we were expecting, because Germany had never lost a World Cup qualifier on home territory. They'd never, ever lost that. And I don't think we had beaten them since 1966 at this point, had we?
We'd done them in like friendlies. I remember doing them in like 85 in Mexico, when the 3-0, when they just stepped off the plane in a friendly. But in the serious stuff, I think we might have beaten them in the Euros in 2000 when they weren't very good. But they'd beaten us at Wembley. It was the last game at the old Wembley in the same set of World Cup qualifiers, because we're trying to qualify for the World Cup in Japan and South Korea, the 2002. And they beat us at the old Wembley 1-0. Hamann got the goal. Kevin Keegan retired in the bogs afterwards, resigned in the bogs afterwards. And so, as you do in these situations, all roads lead to Sweden.
Well, of course. And Sven-Göran Eriksson. And the Germans, let's not forget, for them, they've still got unfinished business from 1966. For them, it's a national scandal to be beaten by England. And I think the coach was it Rudi Völler was the coach?
That's it, yes.
Rudi Völler.
Yes.
And from what I remember, his father suffered a health crisis. If it wasn't a heart attack, I apologize, but he suffered a serious health crisis straight after the match. That's how he did. Yeah, no, it's true. He did suffer a health emergency, and I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it was a heart attack, but I could have that wrong, and I apologize if I have. So it had profound effects beyond just this match. So 1st of September 2001, the England team, the golden generation of the England team, under the supervision of Sven-Göran Eriksson, the arguably mercurial Swedish coach. Although Emile Heskey says of him, I don't remember him ever coaching, but I do remember him sort of giving us the philosophy of the game and teaching us a lot about the philosophy of the game, as it were. So they were prepared mentally. And remember, Sven-Göran Eriksson's thing was, first person on the team sheet is David Beckham, no matter what, whether he's got an injury or whatever. He's my man. He's my go-to man. And it is David Beckham that sets up the first goal, as I remember it.
With your Swedish knowledge and understanding, how do you read Sven? Have you got some kind of insights into how he goes about things that if you don't have that Swedish knowledge, you don't have?
Not really. I'll tell you that in Sweden, they call them Svennis, which is like, it's a colloquial form for Sven, like Charlie's a colloquial form for Charles, but it's not a flattering one. It's not a flattering one. It's like, you're Thomas and suddenly you become like Tommy, as in Tommy Gunn. It's a kind of one that you can't, it's a naff colloquial version of your name, and they seem as somewhat
like people calling me Timmy. That's naff.
Yeah, that's a good example, actually. I didn't realize they called you that. Really? Timmy,
well,
as in mallet?
A lot of people, some people might have done it once.
Yeah.
I'm obviously now opening the door for everyone to do it.
No, they do.
Never show your weak spots.
They do only once, and then they get a horse's head in their bed, obviously. But so in Sweden, they're just happy that there aren't many Swedes who make it to the international stage. There are actually, compared to the size of the country, all the way back from August Strindberg to Ingmar,
Bergman.
Yeah, Ingrid Bergman. Sorry, I was thinking of Ingmar Bergman for some reason, but Ingrid Bergman and everybody else, ABBA and everybody else, and the odd tennis player, of course, they had their season in the sun with Björn Borg, who was sponsored by a millionaire family at the time, the Wallenbergs. sponsor. They're the ones that really made Swedish tennis popular. They put all the money behind it. But going back to Sven-Göran Eriksson, wasn't much of a player, you know, didn't identify himself as a great player or anything like that. Then goes off to Italy and becomes the greatest thing that Sweden, greatest Swedish export in football at that time, you know, player or coach. He was the man. And the thing that I remark on about Sven-Göran Eriksson is that Vanessa Feltz, who is a BBC presenter, of course, a colleague of mine, tells me that she was there on the night that Ulrika, who was this Swedish weather girl living in the UK, known more in the UK than in Sweden, you know, was potentially going to get off with Sven-Göran Eriksson, or did he actually get off with her? I can't remember if he actually got off with her, but it was part of the scandal of Sven-Göran Eriksson. You know, being a Swede, he wasn't able to control his libido. Let's put it that way. Does that answer your question?
But he seemed so, if I say boring, that's the wrong word, but there was obviously much more to him.
Swedes do generally seem boring. You know, Sweden is generally a boring country. It's a little bit less boring now because it's had a little bit of sort of culture from all around the world, I've got to admit. But in those days, it was boring. You know, the typical Swede drove a Volvo, and you called him a Svensson. And that was what we rallied against, we who were punks in Sweden and gathered together at Gallerian in Stockholm, which was like the very first shopping mall in the center of Stockholm. And the security guards used to run us out, and then we'd run back in, they'd run us out. And it was like a merry-go-round in that way. That was the most fun we ever had in Stockholm, you know, being chased by security guards and we going around the back, as the Clash would say, and being let in through the back door again, and then causing a little bit more havoc. Then they chase us out and we'd run around again over and over and over again. That was fun time in Sweden.
So I imagine back then, if you're a kind of Swedish punk or alternative in some way, you got quite a lot to react against, haven't you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh my word. Oh yeah. You reacted against everything. In fact, you didn't have to do much reacting, because just the very fact that you were on the streets, so this would have been like 1978, 79, 1980. The fact that you were on the streets dressed as you were with your, you know, your spiked hair or whatever, not in my case, obviously slightly different spiked hair, but the fact that you're out on the streets like that was quite a shock to most Swedes, you know, the average Swede. So all you had to do was go, ah! in their faces, and then you scare the living daylights out of them. So we spent a lot of time. That's why I'm saying that Sweden was boring at that time, because going around, if that's the most fun you're going to have, then it ain't much of an exciting country. Most
Did it produce anything? Did from a cultural point of view? And I've always thought that listening to this is going to make people angry, but listening to a lot of European music, you know, the people who are trying to do with several honourable exceptions. Especially Les Negres Verts from France, I always loved.
Okay, yeah,
Zombie Lamouche. Yeah, Zombie Lamouche is. I got obsessed with Zombie Lamouche a couple of months ago.
And they were women, weren't they?
No, they weren't. They were called. They were called the Green Black Women, but they were men. That was part of the Gallic Humour. I think.
Definitely remember the band, but clearly
from a musical point of view, I've often thought that the musical stuff really suffers from the lack of contact with Black culture, and it's one of the reasons that English music is so good, because it filters in a much more organic and authentic way. It filters through influences from Black America and from Jamaica and so on. But in other art forms, was that kind of punk movement, did it produce anything durable in Sweden?
I think the Swedes were slightly like the Japanese. They're very, very skillful in whatever they do. This is going back to Sven-Göran Eriksson. We'll come on to it in terms of his tactics and everything like that. Because Emile Heskey said, interestingly enough, that Sven-Göran Eriksson was meticulous in his preparation. That's what Swedish people are. Yeah. It's boring. It's the boring bits of culture or sports that they're really, really good at. When I got there, I was shocked. I'd meet like 12-year-old kids that played guitar like Keith Richards. You know, you're like, whoa, how'd you learn that? Well, you know, in Sweden, the government is very, very generous. They give us this recording studio to practice our music in. Do you know, when you went on the underground, you know, like you're on the platform of the underground, on any underground station, there'll be all these sort of like doors that you don't know where it leads to. You know, if you work there, you might know where it leads to. Well, in Sweden, you open one of those doors and you're in a rehearsal a
Right.
rehearsal room that bands are in because they're not disturbing anybody. So you
Yeah.
walk along the platform, you suddenly hear all this music. They get all of that. The kids that I knew at 12 years old, I tell you no lie, they were walking around with Fender Stratocasters. Imagine
Wow.
that. A
Yeah.
12-year-old kid and you're playing the flipping same guitar that Jimi Hendrix was playing 20 years before or something like that. And they were very meticulous in their preparation. They'd learn the right notes. They'd learn how to play the music exactly like they did. So Swedish reggae would sound a little bit like Jamaican reggae, but without the soul, just like the
Yeah.
Japanese stuff.
Yeah.
Japanese can
Yeah.
do lovers rock now. My missus will tell you that. They can
Hmm.
do lovers rock now, but it's not quite as soulful as the lovers rock we know
Well,
because
also, I wonder if it's missing an ingredient of themselves. Is there something unique from themselves? And the way, for example, say that the Beatles took R&B and then brought, hang on, we can use this as a base, but we don't have to limit ourselves to this. You know, it's a mixture of humility in front of Black American music, but the arrogance to think, well, hang on a minute, we can use it as a base to do something a little bit different as well. And as they would say, as the Beatles would say about Motown, you know, we love it, but they just do the same record over and over again. You know, we're gonna do something different. We're gonna take it in new directions.
And you know, it's a very good comparison, and you'll be surprised when I tell you this. Exactly the same. When you bring up the Beatles, you have to reference the sort of music hall era of the
Yes,
United Kingdom,
yes,
not least
yes.
because George Martin was their producer, and that was what he
Hmm.
was producing before they came along. And in Sweden, the artists that, with the exception of ABBA, and ABBA's a kind of a mixed bag. Having said that, they do have roots in what the equivalent of music hall, the music hall tradition in Sweden is called Schlager, you know, these kind of like middle of the road kind of songs that, you know, get into the charts or whatever for a generation. Schlager, Schlager, and they come from a sort of there was a culture around those Schlager songs which were what we call in Swedish, they call it dance band. So, you know, dance band, but what they mean by dance band is, you know, Sven-Göran Eriksson and his troubadours kind of thing. These old time guys
Yeah.
with big beards, kind of a little bit folksy and everything, singing ballads. That's a dance band in Sweden, and they're the ones that generally play the schlagers. The Swedish artists that have come through that tradition, even though they're younger artists, and so they were looking backwards at that tradition, but have absorbed some of that tradition and then brought it updated with either hip hop or disco or pop music from the UK and America and otherwise. They're the ones that are the most successful and arguably the most profound as well. They're the ones that have something Swedish about them. You know, a group like Roxette, for example, has a little bit of Swedish about them. Europe, who did that Final Countdown, they don't have any of that about them. They had a huge hit.
It's just big
Yeah,
hair,
and
bland American rock, isn't it?
and when you go to ABBA, the roots of those individuals in ABBA, particularly Benny and Björn, is in that Schlager tradition.
Oh,
Björn particularly was more of a folk musician. If you
mm,
see him in his early 20s, he's singing, "Oh, where have all the flowers
mm.
gone? Except he's doing it in Swedish. Var
With a
har
finger in
alla
his ear.
blommor bort?"
With a finger in his ear, because that's important in the folk tradition, I
Well,
think.
of
Putting a
course
finger
it
in his
was.
ear.
I don't remember the finger in his ear.
Yeah.
Whereas Benny had a more kind of, he had a group called the Hep Stars, I think it was, which were kind of more kind of European 60s, swinging 60s band, but it still
Hmm.
had a little bit of Swedishness about, there were Swedish examples of, you know, Cliff Richard and the, is it the Searchers that, no, what's Cliff Richard's bands?
Shadows.
The Shadows. Yeah, they're more like that maybe. And, you know, add a little bit of Swedish about them. Anyway, going back to Sven-Göran Eriksson, for
Well,
me,
because
he
it is fascinating from a football point of view,
mm, mm,
because the Swedish tradition had been German
you're
in
absolutely
football.
right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And the way that the Germans set up their side from Beckenbauer is with the sweeper behind the defensive line. And that's the way that Sweden tried to imitate. This game, this 5-1, is the day that that tradition dies.
Dies to death.
In fact, I actually think this result was better for Germany than it was for England, because it forced Germany to do something different. Now, Sven comes from a tradition in Sweden, a relatively new tradition that's been introduced by English coaches. Two are very important. There's Bob Houghton, who took Malmo to the final of the European Cup where they lost to Nottingham Forest in '79, and Roy Hodgson. And what they've done, what Bob Houghton and Roy Hodgson did, was take the English football back four, squeezing up to Sweden. And Sven is entirely in that tradition. He doesn't play the sweeper and the two stoppers in the German tradition. He plays the English style back four. And he took that to Italy and was successful in Italy. And here he is, recently in charge of the England team. It's a dream job. It's a dream game for him, this one, because he's up against the system, the German system that he knows so well, and he believes he's got something superior to it. And this game, as I say, it's the game when that German idea of having the sweeper behind the defensive line dies, because again and again and again, the sweeper is playing England offside, and England they've got an interesting strike partnership, haven't they? And our friend,
Emile Heskey and Michael
doesn't
Owen
score a lot of goals.
No, but even Emile Heskey scored in this one, as people would say over and over again, in which the title of his autobiography was exactly that, because he knows. Right. Yeah, that was his title of his autobiography that came out last year. Even Emile Heskey scored, and I actually remember people saying that. I remember people saying that on that night when you listen to, for example, 5 Live on that night, and people say, "Oh, England 5-1, even Emile Heskey scored." It must be irritating to him to hear that, but he did very well because his role there was to provide for Michael Owen, and you saw that. I think he provided at least one, the second Michael Owen goal, but the first one arguably had a role to play there as well.
Yeah, well, he was a great foil for Michael Owen, wasn't it? Because he'd also drop deep. So he'll make an extra man in midfield. He's a huge physical.
And he was always on the penalty spot as well. So you can't take your eyes off him. If you're a German defender or the German goalkeeper, you're thinking, no, the ball's going to go to the centre forward because he's the guy on the penalty spot. But what he's doing is taking people away from Michael Owen to then sneak in from the right and put goals in behind, into the net.
Indeed. And this was the game when it worked. It worked so well.
So was it a game of tactics then, rather than Germany falling apart, because they get the first goal?
They do.
They're in the ascendancy when the game starts.
And it's bizarre looking at the German goal, because you look at those names. I mean, Rio Ferdinand and Sol Campbell, magnificent players, but both of them fall asleep together.
Oh, Sol Campbell looks slow in trying to recover himself.
It looks like he's just switched off.
I know.
The one striker, Neuville, has got the other side, I think, of Ferdinand. Ferdinand's lost him. And then Campbell hasn't picked up the runner at all. It's terrible defending from great defenders. And you might wonder there, are England going to collapse?
Yeah,
because the team looking around, if your great centre-backs are doing this, and we're 1-0 down to Germany, who've already beaten us at Wembley, is it going to be one of those nights when we just collapse?
Well, I think it's not just the players there who are thinking that; it's all the fans that are thinking that as well, and the people back home. As the old football song used to say, "Back home, they'll be thinking about us." Yeah, we're thinking, "Oh, here we go again." And Germany nearly scored a second, by the way. They should have scored a second, but somehow their striker missed, and he knows he's missed a sitter. I think one of his colleagues picks him up off the ground and says, "Look, just forget about it. Just score the next one that comes along." But the next one didn't come along. How come?
Well, because England got back in the game so quickly. It's amazing, isn't it, how thin the line can be? Because imagine if that second German goal goes in, it's 2-0. It's an entirely different game. That's what, for me, that's one of the fascinating things about football. It's one of the things I love about it, that every game has inside of it the seeds of lots of different narratives. It could go in lots of different ways. And imagine Germany 2-0 up. They don't have to push forward. England disintegrate, and it could be a heavy England defeat. Instead of which, we're here nearly 20 years later talking about a 5-1. And obviously, the quick equaliser is absolutely vital to you get one back straight away. The momentum switches back with you straight away, and away you go.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you're right. We're talking about it 20 years later, but I imagine that many of those footballers who are playing in that match are still talking about it, because it would have been the highlight of most of their career. This was the golden generation, as they were known, of English footballers that didn't quite deliver, did they? They didn't deliver on a European national level or on a world national level.
Well, look at it. 9 months later, who's in the final of the World Cup? Germany. Yeah. And giving Brazil a game, and England have already gone. That campaign really disappoints me. That 2002 World Cup campaign. It's a very strange World Cup because there's the European season is longer than it's been before. As a result, they're trying to milk as much out of the Champions League as they can. So there are two separate group phases of the Champions League. You know, you get out the group phase, then you go into another group phase before the knockout game starts. So it's a longer season. And this World Cup, it's the first one in Asia, and they're desperate to avoid the rainy season in Japan and South Korea. So they start it earlier than usual. It starts in May, when usually they start kind of 10th June, something like that. Around. So there's much less time for the players to recover from the arduous season. And it's one of the reasons that, as FIFA acknowledged, in terms of quality, it was a dreadful World Cup, because the majority of players who played through the European season were just physically on their knees. It's the reason that you get Turkey and South Korea in the semi-finals. You know, the United States, who in the future are going to be a power, but they weren't a power then. They beat Portugal something like 4-0 or something.
That's mad, wasn't it? It's completely mad.
Yeah,
when you think about it.
Because physically, the European players were really on their knees, and that's obviously something which affected England. Germany, they've reorganised a little bit, but really, I think they would acknowledge, even though they got to the final and gave Brazil a game in the final, they weren't very good, and they had the humility a few years later to just do a whole reboot. You know, Das Reboot in the name of a wonderful book by Raphael Honigstein.
And half
they had the
decent film as
humility
well.
to know. And imagine they've got to a World Cup final in 2002. And within a couple of years, they're thinking, you know what, we're crap. Let's just start the whole thing again.
That's the kind of thing you can't do in England, because we're so wedded to our 4-4-2, amongst other things, in the system. What was the theory, though, behind having a sweeper behind the back four? What was that theory? What was the purpose of that? Because I don't get it.
He's the free man.
Yeah.
And so what he's going to do is he's going to bring the ball out. They're almost like you're hiding a player at the back. And Beckenbauer did it well. One who did it magnificently well was Matteo Sammer. When Germany won the Euros in '96 and in England, he was just fantastic, because it's almost like they've hidden him at the back, and then suddenly he'd appear, and he was like a Rolls Royce. And then he got injured, and they never really replaced him. The fellow doing the role at this point was Novotny, who I don't think was particularly good, but that was the German mentality. That was the way that they did it. And part of it is that this free man can bring the ball out and appear as an element of surprise. Another part is, well, one centre back is marking one striker, one centre back is marking the other striker, and he's just free to come along and plug the gaps. So he has to read the game. He's a cerebral type of player as well. But you know, if he drops too far deep, then and England have a striker like Michael Owen, you just slip in Michael Owen behind him.
It's pace that defeats it. Then, but with the theory, though, does it allow having the sweeper behind the back four? Does it allow the back four to push higher up the field, or are they better off staying closer to?
Well, it's not really a back four. It's two stoppers, sweeper, and then wing backs either side.
I've got you. Yeah, in that sense. Okay. Yeah. So, but does it allow them to push up further then?
Well, if theoretically, yes, they can do that. They can play the game in your half of the field and try and stop the counter attack at source, but not necessarily. You can also drop back and defend deeper. Depends on how you want to interpret the system. But the system gave way too much space to a rapier like Michael Owen. And the thing about the 3 goals that Owen scores, the finishing, because we can talk about his pace and so on, but the finishing on all 3 is unbelievable. When the first 2 are high volleys that 99 players would have just ballooned them over the bar, but he gets over them so well. And the other one, he's been slipped through past the German sweeper, and he's coming in at an angle. And most goalkeepers absolutely love that situation because they can control it. Because you work out the angles that you dive across, and you can cover a shot to the far post. There's one position that if you do that, you cannot defend. And that's high up on the near post, because you're ready to dive across. You can't get back high up on the near post.
Yeah, no, of course.
You can block it low with your feet if it goes low to the near post.
If you're
but
lucky.
The place that you cannot defend is high.
Yeah.
You know, unless you're like Courtois and you've got a kind of pipe cleaner for an arm, you just kind of stretch it out. But if you're a normal dude, you just can't do it. And he put it there. He puts it there deliberately. It's a masterclass in finishing from Michael Owen.
So it is down to the tactics then, because I mean, you say that must have been part of the England team's preparation, because again, Emile Heskey says they watched videos over and over and over and over and over again. I think he might even have fallen asleep in one. He certainly fell asleep during the video reruns under Gerard Houllier at Liverpool, as it was then. But it must have been about the preparation, because the coach would have said that. The coach would have been saying, look, you want to put a ball in that top right-hand corner because the goalie is going to be diving towards the left. He won't be able to reach in the top left-hand corner. Again, as well, part of the tactics was, and I suppose it's nothing original, when you've got Steve Gerrard on the pitch, for him to stand outside the box, and if any ball comes to him, just blast it. He does get a wicked or lucky deflection to help him score a goal, but you could see that the Germans weren't really expecting any player to shoot from that distance. They were expecting England to come into the box and then somehow get a goal. Do you know what I mean? The long distance power drive from Steve Gerrard just seemed to come out of the blue. For the Germans, they seem to be taken by surprise by it.
I don't think he did get a deflection. Now, John Motson at the time said deflection, and then he looked at it again, and it was just a great shot. It was his first international goal, Steve Gerrard, and that goal comes right on the stroke of half time, and the third England goal comes right after half time. So in 5 minutes of footballing time, it's a 1-1 draw. No, it's 3-1 England. So that's it's probably one of the most banal football cliches of a good time to score, because I don't know many bad times to score, but getting one just before.
No, but it is a good time actually. No, come on, you know that it might be a cliche, but actually it does make sense.
Some cliches are cliches because they're true, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. You get a goal just before you gain half time. I don't care if you're 2-0 down and you get one goal back, or if you're 2-0 up and you get one more goal. That kills the game as far as the opposition's concerned. When they're going for half-time talks, it's not going to be pleasant, is it? Okay, and the German fans spoke with their feet, and by the end of the match, the stadium, this glorious Munich stadium, is half empty, if not 2/3 empty. They can't take any more. The England fans are there till the very end, the bitter end, as it were. And when Heskey gets his goal, he does the old, it's like playing golf thing.
Yes.
I don't get that. Why do footballers do that? We know that they go off playing golf like Donald Trump when there are more important things to discuss. But, why do they
mate of mine in England, he just sent me I don't know, GIF or whatever they call them, on WhatsApp the day after the US elections. And all it says is, golf is shit.
That's not a bad one. I've had a few of those GIFs or whatever you call them, maybe memes, if you like. And I've had one with Donald Trump bawling his eyes out, saying, I don't want to go. And he's in the White House and they're trying to escort him out. I don't want to go. And jokes apart, though, we're talking today, the day after the FA chairman has had to resign. You know that? He's had to resign. Yes. Greg Clark. Yes. For using an old term phrase to describe black footballers. I don't know. You couldn't make it up. And not just black footballers, by the way. He wasn't entirely on point with his description of women footballers either, etc.
Is he
And
an equal opportunities discriminator? Is that why
apparently he is, because his argument is that, look, I'm resigning. It's inexcusable the terms I use, but don't forget I and my colleagues have done, more than, in a kind of a Donald Trump way, saying, oh, I've done more for black people than any president ever, including Abraham Lincoln. In that kind of Donald Trump. In that kind of Donald Trump way, he said, don't forget, we've done a lot to bring about sort of equality in the football game and to spread the love and to bring in minorities and this, that, and the other. Look, football is still old school. Like it or not, there are elements of football that just haven't moved on with the times. Oh, they'll tick the boxes. And they'll say, yeah, times have moved on. We ain't where we used to be and all of that. But the reality is, and I'm going back to Emile Heskey on this, so it's such a shame he's not joining us today. The reality is, for years, Emile Heskey got it in the neck from England football fans and from his own Liverpool football fans as well. Not Leicester, I'll come into Leicester in a moment. He got it in the neck because he wasn't scoring as many goals as they say a centre-forward is supposed to be scoring, because people aren't prepared to give a centre forward credit for being the goal provider when you want him putting it in the back of the net. I think nowadays football fans are a little bit more educated about that. Yes. So they understand that strikers fulfill different roles and centre forwards do too. But in that time, he got in the England team, and he talks about when subsequently after Sven-Göran Eriksson, Steve McLaren's the England coach, and Steve McLaren gives him a call to bring him back in the England fold and says to him, slightly disrespectfully actually, and you could tell that Emile Heskey still got the hump about it, calls him up and says, yeah, well, I've spoken to Michael Owen about you. And, Emile Heskey is like, well, why'd you have to speak to Michael Owen about me? You've seen me play. I've been playing the Premier League for ages, played for England a number of times. Why do you need to speak to Michael Owen about him? But it's almost kind of like, you are only there to provide for Michael Owen. And they use that to a certain extent in Liverpool as well, because they both played for Liverpool at the same time. So you needed the sort of like the strength, and sometimes that's discriminatory in the way that they describe it.
Mm-hmm.
The now disgraced Stuart Hall, I don't want to quote him, but nevertheless, he used to have this clip that they used to play over and over and over and over again on the BBC about him describing Emile Heskey as a wildebeest, steaming forward or whatever. So the way that Emile Heskey was perceived was like, okay, big black guy provides the strength for the small little guy who's going to bang them in. And I think that has still, still pervades the game to a certain extent. The way that
I know some of the players are very unhappy with that stereotype. And one way with Heskey, one way to show that stereotype, however much truth it contains, it doesn't contain the whole truth. One way to prove that is looking at the goal he scored against Germany, because
brilliant goal.
It's just dainty footwork. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to take it first time on his left foot. And so the risk he's running is that the ball, it might get a little bit stuck under his feet. And it's a dance move that he does, to control it with his left and just stick it in with his right. It's very, very dainty footwork. So, all he needs to do is show people that goal. And, he can say, I had all the pace and power and all that you want to bring up in conversation, but I had a lot more as well.
Yeah, indeed. And he should have, his goal celebration should have been more one of those reggae dance moves, I feel, like the bogle, bam, 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 bam. They were dancing that in Philadelphia when the news came in that the Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania count had gone to Joe Biden. They started playing Bam Bam, Chakademus and Pliers' version of Bam Bam, not the original by Sister Nancy, which I think they should have played, or even the version by Toots and the Maytals. They were playing the Chakademus and Pliers. And anybody who knows anything about Chakademus and Pliers, before they got to number one with Tease Me, Tease Me, Tease Me, Till I Lose Control, they're already huge in the black community with this tune called Murder, She Wrote, which had this new rhythm that Sly Dunbar of Sly and Robbie had introduced into the mix. He'd done this little kind of like Diwali kind of rhythm, slightly Indo-Jamaican rhythm. And it came up with a dance move. There was a guy called Bogle. That was his nickname. Can't remember what his real name is. He's late now because he died in a horrific sort of like stabbing or something like that, as I remember, if I recall rightly. But he was this Jamaica's #1 sort of dance creator, if you could put it on a street level. You know, in Jamaica, they create new dances every single week. I don't know how they do it. Every single week there's a new dance, and there's usually a tune to go with it. Anyway, the tune was Murder, She Wrote, and the rhythm is bum 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 bum, and we did this dance. So you had to have your arms out like this. Da, 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 da. You had to stick your ass out as well, by the way. Anyway, they were doing that. They were doing that in Philadelphia, believe it or not, just last weekend, as the news came in that Trump was no more in terms of the presidency of the United States. In any case,
so Heskey should have done the bogle.
He should have done the bogle,
instead of which he was miming doing a bogey. I don't really know what that means, but I know it's a golf term.
Well, we know what Colonel Bogey means, you know. Ba 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 ba, or as we call it, Hitler has only got one ball, the other is
It's not really tactful after we've just beaten Germany 5-1, have we?
This is the point I was trying to make. If it was a bogey, it was a Colonel Bogey. And I imagine that the England fans, you know, the guy with the trumpet was out there going, ba 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 ba. Look, Germans don't love Hitler, so they're not going to be bothered about that. They'll be laughing their heads off. Didn't know you had a tune about Hitler having only one ball, the other being in the Royal Albert Hall. It's like, you know, how many holes there are in Blackburn. You know, you can fill up the Albert Hall with those holes.
That England fan culture, because obviously we didn't make it to the World Cup in 1994, and it's just after 1994 that I moved away. And I noticed during the 1998 World Cup that they were doing, you know, they had the band. I didn't know the band before.
I know.
And they were doing that from The Great Escape.
Yes, yes,
you know,
yes,
which was written to try and imitate Colonel Bogey, because they couldn't get Colonel Bogey to do it. You know, they couldn't get the rights to that. So, they did something very, very similar. And it seemed fun. It seemed, because my association of England crowds before, away in tournaments, you know, in the 80s and so on, is just horrible right-wing nationalists, often with racist undertones. Now, I remember John Barnes scoring that great goal for England here in Rio in 1984, and there's some England thugs on the plane saying that the score was only 1-0 because a goal from John Barnes can't count for England. And the impression that I got from afar from the 1998 World Cup and this game as well is that there's been a change, and it's more fun and it's more inclusive. Do you think that's still the case, or have we slid back?
I'll say this. There were some positive England fans, you know, many positive England fans, because I remember going to Wembley at one time and getting a lot of these racists there. And there were England fans that said, you know, come over and sit with us, you know. And in a way, it made me feel a lot safer because, you know, the environment at the time in England, well, going back a few years, you know, you were used to a little bit of racism. And I'm not saying that something that people should be used to, but nevertheless, it was there. But the idea that there were people who saw you as a fellow comrade in arms made all the difference. There are a lot of Black England fans at this point, you know, who are putting up. People forget. You look at some of those pictures of the England games, and you will see Black fans there, and they've had to put up with a lot of this stuff. They put it up with it almost as a way of, you know, getting on with life, because you had to put up with a lot of stuff. You know, as a Black person in Britain at the time, not just as a Black person, I'm not suggesting that was exclusively the prejudice there was in Britain. There was a lot more than that. But, and there are still one or two, going back to Greg Clark, the FA chairman who had to resign yesterday, there are still one or two who are, yeah, some of my best mates were coloured. You know, there are still one or two, you get that. Well, what they're trying to do is say to you, You're all right. You're one of us.
Yeah,
I knew this coloured bloke once. And then you, uh-oh, here we go. And just take it. You know, I regret, actually, I might have told you this before. I regret many years ago. I remember this one guy that used to phone up for BBC 5 Live when I was there overnight. And he once said, an old geezer, he used to call out every now and then. I haven't heard from him for ages. And he was ill, so I don't know if he's still with us. I hope he is. But he called up out of the blue, and he's up in Cumbria, Neil in Cumbria, I seem to remember his name was. And he like said, yeah, Dotun, I knew this coloured bloke once. And I thought to myself, shall I, shan't I? Shall I, shan't I? Shall I, shan't I? And I thought about it for a minute or so as he was like completing his sentence. Then I decided, look, mate, you know, those coloured blokes, I think they'd rather nowadays be called black rather than color. Oh my God, I didn't know. I apologize. I'm really sorry. And then I felt really bad because I thought he's an old geezer from old times. You know, he's not the FA chairman. The FA chairman should know better. But some old geezer up in Cumbria who's only ever met one black person before, and I am his conduit to the black world and to the politics of multiculturalism. I think you've got to allow it sometimes. I know it's controversial. It's not pleasant, but he didn't mean anything by it. And I couldn't say that he was saying it from a place of ignorance. I just say he was saying it from a place of, you know, being cut off from the multiculturalism that is the capital and the major cities, is what I would say.
This is easy for me to say, but I think this is an excellent example of the need to pick up people from where they are and bring them gently to where you want them to be. Going at people with sanctimony, I think it's one of the reasons for me that explains why 70 million Americans just voted for Donald Trump.
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. That's a tough one because
debate, and I'm not sufficiently qualified to have a qualified opinion. But those are my thoughts watching it.
Do you know what I feel about America? And I'm not saying everybody who votes for Donald Trump is a racist. Clearly, some of them are. And maybe some of the people that vote for Joe Biden are racist. But the people who vote for Donald Trump are, some of them, racist and unashamedly so, because he allowed the atmosphere, the febrile atmosphere of racism to just spread across America. And so they I saw this black American guy, this African American guy, and he was in tears when the result came through in Pennsylvania. This was like an educated guy, looked like an academic or something like that. He was trying to like define what happened. Then he suddenly started crying and he stumbled through it and he took off his glasses and he says, look, I've had for the last 4 years to bring up my children in this atmosphere of racism, to tell them to watch out when they go to the supermarket, to try and understand what they might meet on the streets and everything. And he was like in tears, you know. In America, America's got no excuse. America that was founded upon racism and the exploitation of enslaved Africans, and that has gone through this journey of the assassination of Martin Luther King for trying to get civil rights, the rights to vote, which had already been guaranteed them in the Constitution, but somehow it excluded them, and the whole journey and everything. So even if you live in the most remote part of America, even if you're a tourist or a new immigrant that comes to America from China or Vietnam, or you better learn that history very quickly. You better learn that that history is, first of all, predicated on Native Americans that owned the land, and the land was taken off them through some philosophical sidestep by an English philosopher to justify the appropriation of the land from the Native Americans, and what's happened to them since then, and to the African Americans. Well, you better learn that. Otherwise, you have no place in the United States. The United States is not your home, so you get the hell out of there, is how I feel about it. What I was going to say is, this is easy for me to say, but the charts on that day that England beat Germany 5-1 in Munich, the charts Well, I don't know. It's easy for me to say that So Solid Crew at number 2 kind of saves the charts somewhat. And our homeboys and girls from round the way with a sublime track, which nobody understood, or many people didn't understand at the time, the fastest rap ever going. I didn't realize that this was going to be the beginning of what we now call grime. And it was the most clear departure from us following American hip hop. Do you remember that? 21
No,
seconds.
no, because I'm away,
Yeah.
so I'm loving this. This is teaching me. Tell me
Yeah.
more.
Well, So Solid Crew is an amalgamation of different individuals who, you see, what happens in the UK, and it's happened before with reggae, just a few years before with reggae, from 1980, maybe 85, when the Saxon sound system come up, and through their least famous rapper, Peter King, devised this new way of doing reggae emceeing, which is fast style. Basically, the Jamaican guys would do, like, yes, my name is Big Youth. I come for nice up the dance. We gonna nice up the dance. Well, suddenly these Saxon youngsters from South London, Saxon sound system, are going and saying, we're going to speed that up by 10%. Just like the Damned did to punk rock on their records. They couldn't speed up as live as much as good as Rat Scabies was as a drummer, but they speeded it up. They speeded up Jamaican rap, and Jamaicans were incensed by it to a certain extent, but in awe of it as well, because that's where Smiley culture comes in with his 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's our Smiley culture with the American and me, and we come for teaching right and not the wrong. The Cockney translation. Cockney's not a language; it is only a slang, and was originated in England. None of those Jamaican DJs could rap that fast, and of course,
Is that the urban environment
I
having an
think it
effect?
is. I think it is. Going back to Sweden, Swedish reggae is far, or was faster than the Jamaican reggae. And people in Sweden put it down to, well, it's a cold environment. When you're playing live, people got to warm up. They've just come out of minus 10 degrees centigrade, and they're in the dance hall now, but they're still shivering from outside. So let's speed up the music a little bit. The reggae that I played in Jamaica, the famous album, Giant Steppers album, produced by Dennis Blackbeard Bavell, as he was known, although I like to call him Bluebeard Bavell. He knows why. Anyway, that album, the tunes that we're playing is, so what do you really want? What do you really, or say, space reggae is international reggae. Is da, 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 da. Whereas Bob Marley, there were two types of reggae at the time. There was what you call rockers, which is a faster style that Sly Dunbar started with about 1977, 76, 77, around the punk time. He came up with this style that was like twice as fast as reggae was, because reggae initially was a slow down of rock steady that come before, which was a slow down of ska or blue beat that come before that. So since 1960, the trajectory of Jamaican music was to slow down the pace. And Sly and Robbie tell a great story, because all of Bob Marley's tunes, if you think about it, apart from Exodus, all of his tunes are what you call one drop. The original reggae style was feel it in the one drop, and you've still got time to rock. That's not the right melody. I'm not doing it right justice. As you know, I can't sing. But that was what reggae was. Now, Sly and Robbie tell a great story about when they, Peter Tosh was one that really made Sly and Robbie's career, took them overseas for the first time. And I was present at that tour when they came overseas for the Equal Rights album tour. But they said when they were recording Equal Rights, they wanted to speed it up because Sly had come up with this new, faster beat. And they were like, Peter, let's play a tune with this faster. And he said, no, man, just one drop, because Peter Tosh is trying to emulate his former band member, Bob Marley's success. And he said, no, just stick to one drum. The only tune that they could get Peter Tosh to agree to do a rockers beat on was the tune Stepping Razor. So if you listen to it, Stepping Razor, not an original Peter Tosh tune. I think it was Joe Higgs that wrote the tune initially. He might also be on the album. He certainly toured with Peter Tosh as well, the great Joe Higgs, who taught the Wailers, Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, and Bob Marley to sing and how to present themselves, etc. But Stepping Razor if you, don't you watch my size, I'm dangerous. So I'm like a stepping razor, don't you watch my size, I'm dangerous, dangerous. That's the only Rockers tune, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, because all the other tunes are, I don't want no peace, I want equal rights and justice. Anyway, going back onto the So Solid crew, they've now speeded up rap. Remember, rap in 2001 was all about, hotel, well, it wasn't hotel, motel, holiday inn. It was more like hip hop, hooray, hooray. No, it was after Naughty by Nature. What's going on in 2001? 2001 would have been still Biggie Small, yeah, Tupac, yeah. It was even after that, wasn't it? What's going on in 2001 rap wise? Well, I'll tell you what was going on in 2001 rap wise. It was the Fugees. It was the Fugees, and you can see a representation
Snoop
of
Doggy Dogg.
Snoop Doggy Dogg as well. This was a little bit after Snoop broke big.
Which is Laid Back.
Definitely Laid Back, yeah. Perfect Gentleman by Wyclef Jean, which is number 10 in the charts on this day of 1st of September 2001, is a rap that is laid back. Now imagine that.
There's the Eve as well with Let Me Blow Your Mind.
Well, I knew you'd go for that, because you always go for the ladies one.
Which has kind of got a Snoop kind of groove.
Yes, it has.
Laid
although
back.
Yeah, although
with his mind on his money and his money on his mind.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that tune is more a No Doubt tune than a Snoop tune, because of course it's got Gwen Stefani of No Doubt doing the lead vocals on it, the actual singing. Eve, I'm not sure about. She's all right as a rapper, but she's not a rapper that you'd reference now, because she didn't break any ground with the rap. You know, I'd have rather heard Missy Misdemeanor Elliott on that track,
so
or Queen Latifah.
You see the So Solid crew as the pioneers of grime.
Oh, definitely, 100%. There would be no grime without that moment, and just this 21 seconds, because they had 21 seconds to go. 21 seconds to go, and after they did their 21 seconds, the group imploded in court case, in the case of one guy who's been accused of murder, but also kind of like a disintegration of them thinking that we are individuals rather than the band. There were different individual artists come together, and they just couldn't take it. They spent a lot of money getting drunk on champagne, the best champagne, and the posse seemed to grow. It seemed like anybody who came from certain parts of London that was a rapper was part of the wider So Solid crew. So you never knew how many there were. 50 people could show up and be all So Solid crew, and getting all the girlies because, oh, you So Solid crew, that kind of thing. And there were some girlies in it as well. Well, some ladies, I should say. Apologies for that. Miss Dynamite and all the rest of them. Koshin is at number 6 with High G, which is decent and half tune, isn't it?
It's drum and bass, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's the kind of thing that it's drum and bass, but it's got a great singer on it. They've got a great singer on it. It's a lot of the drum and bass was kind of like rappers. Here you've got a great singer turning drum and bass to a little bit of melody as well. But I like Take Me Home by Sophie Ellis-Bextor, because this is a disco tune, a very classy. I'm glad you thought so. I was nervous that you wouldn't go for it.
No, well, I'm a sucker for like Dusty Springfield ballads from the 60s, and this is very, very much in that tradition.
You know your music.
I'm surprised how much I like some of these. When I went back and looked at these charts, I was surprised at how much I got out of it. Surprised how much I liked it.
Jamiroquai at number 7. That ain't a bad one, Little Lil. It's not a bad one, is it?
No, there's something about him
that you don't like.
Always, I don't know what it is.
I know. He's a little bit cocky. He's a little bit cocky. He's a little bit white boy, I can do the funk thing kind of thing. And I don't want to turn it into a race thing, because I think he's got every right to, and he's very good at it.
The music's there for everyone to pick up,
Yeah, absolutely. But you do get a sense that, look, you're not doing something that a lot of the Yanks haven't done, and you're doing it more successfully because you fit, the image, as it were. And I'm not talking necessarily about the racial image. Sometimes, white artists have got more of a pop sensibility. I think pop is like a white thing, and they get it. If you saw somebody like Kylie Minogue today, she kind of gets it in a way that the equivalent black artists may not get. They can be schooled into getting it, but it doesn't come naturally, because the equivalent black artists will probably come out of the church. And there are white artists like that as well, by the way, who come out of the church and then do a pop thing and they kind of balance both acts. That's a bit controversial, what I've said, isn't it? It's a bit controversial. What do you reckon?
You're entering in a minefield when you go into any of these generalizations, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. Maybe I should take all that back and just allow it to speak for itself. We agree, though, that Castles in the Sky, Ian Van Doubt, is shit.
I think we can live happily without ever listening to that again, ever.
Having said that, remember, this is 10 days before 9/11, and suddenly Castles in the Sky takes on a different significance, I thought.
Yeah, perhaps. And just purely by chance, I was in England at the time of 9/11. I flew. I watched this game in Brazil. Went to Argentina for a World Cup qualifier, Argentina, Brazil, and then I was in England for 9/11. I remember being in my mum's house, and she's got the radio on, and first one little plane has flown in. And then another little plane has flown in, and it's been treated as if it's some kind of coincidence, you know. And then the news suddenly hits you that this is something more and something bigger. What would you say, in cultural terms and in political terms? We know what the consequence of this. This was war, you know. But in cultural terms, was there a consequence? Was there a consequence of 9/11
of course.
when music was being made?
Oh, I don't know about the music. Well, I'll come on to the music in a second. Cultural terms, obviously, it was a moment that the Islam became suddenly, you know, it almost seemed as if we were in the same kind of crusade, Christian crusade against Islam that Richard I had been in hundreds of years before. It did seem that way culturally. Right. And I remember I was half asleep listening to the radio, and it was a sunny day, half asleep listening to the radio, and I kind of heard a plane has gone into one of the World Trade Centers. And my business partner at the time called me up and he said, look, just switch on your TV. And I said, yeah, no, I know, plane's gone into one of the World Trade Centers. He said, just switch on your TV right now. So I thought, okay. So I dragged myself down, just moved into my house, dragged myself down, switch on the telly. And I'm watching this, and I'm watching, you know, smoke coming out of one of the World Trade Center. And almost within 30 seconds of my switching in on the TV, I kind of saw the shadow of another plane that seemed to come across the camera and then go into the next one. And it was kind of like, oh, what was that? It was kind of like weird because, you know, we just had a camera on this, hardly any commentary. It was like, yeah, this plane has gone to the World Trade Center, and then just like a shadow out of nowhere, something came in. And at that moment, I think for most of us would have known that this isn't a coincidence. Something's happened here. Even though the year before, people had been almost predicting that planes would crash into buildings because of the switch over of the millennium. You know, if the clocks couldn't, all the computer clocks couldn't handle it, all the planes would go in, and nobody wanted to fly on January the 1st, 2000.
I remember my stepdaughter convinced that she was going to die. That was going to be the end of civilization on the 1st of January 2000. Wow. So she would desperately. She was only like 13 at the time, and she would just plead with her mum, let me do this because I've only got another 2 months to live. You know, on the basis that everything was going to end.
You know,
here we are 20 years later, and she's still plaguing me now, come around to visit.
It's a good anecdote.
I've got a reminder now that you didn't die on the 1st of January 2000.
You know, the Rastas on the 7th of July, 1977, they believed that, you know, the Black Star Liner was going to come. So Rastas all over Jamaica packed their bags and went to the harbor. 2 7s
clash.
Yeah, well, it was 4 7s, but 2 7s. Yeah, that was what Marcus Garvey had predicted, that when the 2 7s clashed, that boats, these Black Star Liner boats, would come and repatriate black people, the sons of enslaved people, back to Africa. So they'd all packed their bags ready for the end of the world as they knew it. But like I say, they're still waiting for that. The 4 7s or 2 7s never clashed. Okay, so we've come to the end of this conversation, I think, unless you've got anything else to add to it.
No, and I've loved the different areas it's carried us into today. I've learned. Yeah. This has been one of, for me, where I'm ending this podcast a little less ignorant than I started it. And that's a lovely way to spend your time, I think.
I hope we can get Emile Heskey to join us on some occasion, or otherwise. And, you know, fair enough, he agreed to do it, and I'm sure that something else has come up. But for those of you who've been listening to this podcast expecting Emile Heskey or hoping that Emile Heskey would show up, don't diss him. Don't be one of those who say, even Emile Heskey didn't show up. Don't do that. Don't do that. Tim, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and great as he is, he wouldn't have taught me so much about either Swedish culture or the birth of grime music. So thank you for doing it.
No, we wouldn't have expected him to. But the point I wanted to make earlier was, if you saw his time at Leicester before he got signed to Liverpool, he was so imperious as a centre forward. That is what you should judge Emile Heskey on. Before they started using him as a foil for other players, he was an imperious centre forward. I remember so many times thinking, how did he do that? You just couldn't stop him. He was unstoppable. Ball on the ground generally, but nevertheless, he could do a turn in the centre box that nobody else, in the penalty box that the defenders didn't seem to see. He was imperious, and good luck to him. And you know, I wish we had an opportunity. I hope we get an opportunity to talk to him about that time.
But we all enjoyed the dainty feat with which he scored that 5th goal. Germany
Indeed.
1, England 5.